Hi, I know what you're probably thinking. 10 Years Later has been gone for a while. Longer than I wanted it to be gone. I unfortunately did not expect that starting in the month of May I would go through a pretty rough mental health spell that I'm still kind of dealing with now, and that it would also have an impact on me physically and slow down my progress in terms of making videos. It always happens at the beginning of the summer, dude. Like, what is this? It's so unlucky. But I'm here now, glad to be here. And I kind of just want to jump back in because I have 4 June 2012 albums to talk about in this series. I'm behind schedule, and I kind of want to get back in front of the schedule, if that's possible. So, let's not waste any more time. Welcome back to 10 Years Later, the series where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were either impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. And as you can tell from the title, the album that we'll be talking about today is the 2012 Usher record, Looking for Myself. Usher, you know his name. I didn't even need to give his last name because you know who Usher is. R&B singer, iconic figure in popular music, judge on The Voice, the guy that gave the world Justin Bieber. He's done it all. So much so, in fact, that this album was his 7th back in 2012. Given how the music industry loves to chew up and spit artists out, it's really something when someone can go for that long to hit 7 albums, at the time at least. However, despite his incredible popularity over the years, this was the first album that sort of brushed him back a small bit. While it became his 4th straight Billboard 200 chart topper and had some big singles in Climax and the top 10 peaking Scream, the record did see some of Usher's lowest sales since his earliest days, even if it helped Sony's music revenue. From what I read, it sounded like viewers may have been turned off by some of the deeper integrations of electronic pop songs to the point where he was even being called a sellout. How cool must it feel to last 7 albums before people call you a sellout? But after looking at his last album, Raymond vs. Raymond in 2010, which was okay despite a somewhat sprawling length, I wanted to see if this thing was as rough as I heard others make it out to be. And once again, the length did scare me a little bit. I had to listen to the expanded edition since it was the only one available on Spotify, and it was 18 tracks stretching 71 minutes. Par for the course for Usher, I see. And thankfully this album wasn't mercilessly bad, it was just kinda bland. Despite Usher's best attempts at tackling multiple genres, not all of them stick the landing, and many of them just crumble under their own weight. Can't Stop Won't Stop kicks off the album, and you'll probably see this with some of the next episodes of this series, but my June 10 Years Later videos have been loaded with electronic dance pop music. Despite being the first episode you'll see, this was the last of the 4 June 2012 albums that I listened to for this series, so good to know Usher couldn't even give me a reprieve from the electronic pop music. Other than the chorus having some catchy moments, not even Usher can really inject much of his personality into what feels like a dime a dozen club banger. The vocal filters can often take away from his ability to really own an instrumental like this, and as a result, the song becomes tired really fast. Many of these same sentiments can also be applied to Scream, the big difference being that at least that track has a slightly more memorable hook and Usher's vocals sound a lot better on it. Although that beat drop thing at the end of the bridge leading into the final chorus angered my ears, and I wasn't even wearing headphones, so make of that what you will. I was also disappointed in the album's title track, Looking for Myself, as while it does feature some nice experimentation in how it moves in a bit of a soft rock direction with help from Empire of the Sun's Luke Steele, that sound didn't really excite me all that much or feel like it played a ton into Usher's strengths. It's not bad enough to feel like an identity crisis or anything like that, but it just doesn't have much of a hook to really keep me wanting to come back. Let Me See runs it back to the more energetic feel with something a bit more upbeat. I don't mind the production here, it's bright and energetic enough without being too bombastic, but I'm not too huge on the chorus. It's not bad, it's just not something I feel myself wanting to come back to. Rick Ross at least drops a decent guest verse, although there is a really weird bar on the song where he says, "Had to valet park it, Chanel hoodie on, looking like Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman, I'm wanted." It's hard to describe just how little that bar makes sense and how little reason it has to exist. Twisted might have been the most disappointing song on the album to me. A more minimal Pharrell-produced song with a pleasantly old-school feel. I was really hoping for something a bit more special with this one. Unfortunately, the beat feels a bit unfocused to me between the mixing of the banging drums and bass line and the sampling of the "wait a minute" that Pharrell would use on Nerd's Lemon later down the line. All of it just ends up feeling a little bit distracting. The chorus is not bad, but it could have been more interesting, and the song is mostly saved by Pharrell having a great guest verse with a very bouncy flow. Also, why is there only a clean version of the album on Spotify? The dude curses on the chorus, and it's really awkward that it's not there. Anyway, Dive is a song I can appreciate for feeling closer to the R&B side of Usher, while featuring some light guitars that give it a bit more of a poppy feel. Usher's vocals are beautiful here, but this is another one that could have benefited from a better chorus. It's a nice song while it plays, but it's nothing I can say I was really moved by. Now, despite some disappointments, there are moments on the album that I really enjoy. Climax is honestly a pretty fantastic song and by far my favorite of the album's big singles. While it still carries a lot of the electronic vibes of the album's early moments, I really enjoy how the song actually cares to tone things down a bit and go for something a bit more emotional. The production also gives Usher a better opportunity to let his vocals shine, making for an easy highlight that stands head and shoulders above a lot of what else is on the album. I'll also admit that Numb did kind of grow on me with a few listens. I think it had a bit more of an airy emotional vibe than some of the other pumping singles on here, and I don't mind the more pounding elements of the song as much. The chorus was also pretty fun, making it a pretty enjoyable single. I Care For You also works for a lot of the same reasons. There are some bigger electronic moments thrown in throughout, but they don't feel as egregious or frustrating. They're downplayed enough for Usher to craft a sticky hook and showcase more of the beautiful vocals that can carry a song all on their own. Show Me also grew on me with a few repeat listens. Initially, I thought the drums were mixed a bit too loud and the chorus got a little sour, but after giving it a few more spins, I enjoyed the vibrant, emotional vibe of the song and couldn't stop singing along to the hook. Might help that I had a small headache when I gave the album my first listen. I get those pretty often. What Happened to You features production from 40, who we know as Drake's producer and best friend, and I bring this up because you bet you can hear 40 on this beat. With its spacey, low-key feel and atmospheric nature, you can absolutely hear his influence on the production. I love me a good 40 instrumental though, so I was excited when I saw his name on here, and the production didn't disappoint. This sounds like a beat that Drake himself would do good things with, but I'm glad it was given to Usher because he delivers a subdued but still stellar vocal performance where he sings about the good and bad sides of fame. It's a track I've already looped plenty of times. I'd even argue it's probably my favorite on the album. Lessons for the Lover is another track that turns things down a bit with very light electronic influence thrown into an instrumental that feels extremely spacey and atmospheric. This is probably one of the closest Usher gets to moving back into the R&B direction on this album, and I couldn't be happier about that. The song is romantic, it's moody, it's ethereal, and it's one of Usher's better vocal showcases on the album. And even though the hook is pretty minimal, I still think it works extremely well for this cut and makes it one of the better ones here. That track had me excited, thinking maybe we would close out the album on a high note, but sadly the last few tracks really disappointed me. Since My Father is one of the record's most personal songs, as Usher touches on some of the actions of his father and how he doesn't want to turn out like him. I really appreciate that angle, and I think it could have made for something extremely compelling, but sadly Usher doesn't really give us much to chew over on the topic. And while the production is kinda hazy and interesting with some blues influence, the lackluster hook makes this a song I desperately wish I liked more. Meanwhile, Euphoria, the closer to the standard edition of the album, brings in Swedish House Mafia for another club banger that does have a bit more of an emotional feel to it. I liked where the beat was going, the chorus had some catchy moments, but I think I just stopped feeling excited about it as soon as that beat drop hit. I see how this could play well in a club setting, but for me it was just an underwhelming end to the standard edition of the album. Except it wasn't the end because the expanded edition added 4 tracks. I'm gonna try to blow through my thoughts on these extra tracks pretty fast because most of them are pretty nondescript and not exactly memorable to begin with. IFU is an energetic cut with some interesting usage of strings, and it does have a few nicer toned down moments within the bouncier elements, but it's unfortunately just a pretty bland song that only really grabs me in small pockets. Say the Words started off really nice with its bright low-key production and pleasantly old school vibe. It took a little for me to get used to Usher's falsetto on the song, but after a few listens it really grew on me and I had a lot of fun with the chorus. It's a cool track to vibe to and probably the best moment on the expanded edition. Second Round is another slower jam that moves back into the R&B style a little bit. The light feel is nice even if a few points feel a little too busy for me. But sadly, while the song as a whole is not bad, it's just another moment that feels like it's brought down by the lack of a strong hook. And Hot Thing closes the expanded edition of the album with one of the bigger, bouncier songs here with a more hip-hop influenced set of production. Sadly, while Usher's vocal tone fits perfectly for the style and a A$AP Rocky drops a pretty fun guest verse. This has what I think is by far the worst chorus on the album. It's a classic moment where it's too repetitive and long-winded to be all that catchy. Like the standard edition, it definitely feels like the expanded edition ended on a pretty underwhelming note. Overall, Usher's 2012 album didn't really hit me as much as I hoped it would, but it also doesn't sink as low as I worried it might have. Some of the early opinions I had been hearing about the album before listening to it made it sound like Usher sold out with the more electronic influenced route to a much larger degree than Raymond vs. Raymond had a few years prior. And sure, I don't really find a lot of the electronic dance pop to be very compelling, but I don't think the album is entirely bad. A lot of that is thanks to Usher's beautiful vocals, and if nothing else, I can respect his attempts at getting a bit more experimental with his production choices. Sadly, they don't always pan out, and I feel like it leads the album to live up to its title. Usher couldn't really find himself and his own comfortable sound. I was also surprised by the amount of choruses that felt pretty sour to me. Usher is usually a hook master, so the fact that he couldn't hit the mark on that very consistently was certainly unexpected. And yeah, even though I can partially blame the expanded edition for this, the album did feel too long and hardly went on any consistent runs in terms of quality. So all in all, the project is not bad, and I think Usher does enough to avoid sellout territory, but I think this record certainly could have been greater than it was. Back in 2012, I'm not sure I would have gravitated towards this album because I wasn't super familiar with its big singles. Listening to it now, it's an album with a few highs scattered between a long and pretty middling track list. If I had to put it on my scale, I'd probably go with an okay rating. Definitely not a bad album and has some tracks I'll definitely return to, but otherwise, it was just okay. But that's just my opinion on this album. What did you guys think about it? Did you listen to it back in 2012? Do you still listen to it now? Did you love it back then? Hate it back then? Do you still love it now? Do you still hate it now? Are you just completely indifferent toward it? Whatever your thoughts and experiences are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. And moving right along, the next album that I'm going to be talking about in 10 Years Later is Justin Bieber's 2012 album, Purpose. How weird that last time I talked about a Justin Bieber album for 10 Years Later, the next episode was on an Usher album. Now I'm talking about an Usher album, and the next episode is going to be on a Justin Bieber record, and Usher was Justin Bieber's mentor. Is there some full circle thing going on? Either way, stay tuned for that, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace. So, let's not waste any more time. Welcome back to 10 Years Later, the series where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were either impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. What's this album called? I love that. I love when I can't remember what the name of an album is.